Right. So, boy, I am so delighted to welcome you all here to Portland, Oregon in person for this meeting for the IPC seminar, Getting Real World with Psoriasis, Advances in Registries and Real World Data in the Field of Psoriasis. And I really want to compliment my colleagues, the administrative staff at IPC, and the meeting hosts at the annual meeting here for allowing us to live stream this webinar on Zoom for those who couldn't make it in person. And one of our speakers will be speaking to us live via Zoom as well. So hopefully the technology will bear well with us. And so I want to welcome you and introduce what we're doing today. So again, I'm Joel Gelfand. I'm an IPC board member. I invite you to follow me on Twitter at Dr. Joel Gelfand. If I get one more follower, I'll be very excited. Steve, there's an opportunity. You know, you can make a Twitter account very quick. You could download the app right now before you talk. All right, and these are my disclosures. And I want to give a special thanks to our lead sponsor, Lilly, as well as our supporting sponsors, BMS and Dermavant. We could not bring this kind of symposium on without that type of support, so we're very grateful for it. And I want to tell you a little about the IPC. So this was founded in 2004. It is a dermatologist-led voluntary global nonprofit organization with a network of nearly 130 psoriasis experts, thought leaders, and professionals dedicated to improving patient care around the globe. And our mission is to improve the care of people with psoriasis worldwide through research, education, and advocacy. And for me, it's been really enlightening to be a part of this organization and see the issues that patients grapple with, you know, in various parts of the world. You know, in the United States, we're sort of resource intense, and it's amazing to see how our colleagues manage disease in less resource rich environments. And this is what I'm going to try and do this morning. We're going to try and identify opportunities for real world data to advance the care of patients with psoriatic disease. We'll review the strengths and limitations of real-world data approaches, discuss regulatory impacts of real-world data for the management of psoriasis, and finally, we will explore future innovations and real-world data for this field so we can try and advance it. And this is really a hot topic. This is an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine from scientists at FDA that came out a week or two ago, an update on the FDA's framework for real-world evidence program. And basically, you know, the cool people call it RWD, that's real-world data, so I'll call it RWD. It's really data relating to the patient health status and or delivery of healthcare collected from a variety of sources, often in routinely collected data, say from the medical record or administrative claims. And real-world evidence is clinical evidence about the usage and potential benefits or risks of a medical product derived from analysis of RWD. And let's face it, we've been using real-world data for decades in medicine, and from a regulatory perspective, it usually is used to drive labeling changes around safety in a post-marketing setting. But it was really codified in 21st Century Cures Act and really made opportunities for regulatory decisions for approval for drugs based on RWD and RWE. So some examples that they provide. So Prograf got approved for prevention of organ rejection in people getting lung transplants based on a non-interventional study, observational data from a registry. So a new indication for a drug based on real world data. And then a gene therapy for spinal muscular atrophy. This got approved as well for people being in an experimental single group trial. And the comparison group wasn't a placebo group, but was rather real world data from patients in looking at the natural history of the condition. So you can see a couple of ways that real world data can be used to drive regulatory decisions for new approvals. And this is a nice framework to think about the natural history of use of RWD in the developmental cycle of a drug. So, you know, in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, often RWD is quite important for designing and planning that clinical trial and often interpreting the results, particularly for safety signals. But then when the drug's moving towards approval, you know, real world pragmatic type trials become increasingly important to see how the drug works in real conditions. Non-interventional, non-randomized interventional studies, as I showed you earlier, and of course, observational studies. And why do we need real-world data in psoriasis? Well, you know, this is true across all fields when it comes down to it, but a nice study out of Spain showed that about a third of patients who go on systemic agents for psoriasis would not have qualified for a clinical trial that would have met the inclusion-exclusion criteria. And a study out of UK from a registry called Bad Beer showed that RCT ineligible patients who were treated biologics had smaller positive improvements and higher serious adverse event rates. So a different risk-benefit ratio in the real world than what you see in a clinical trial. On the right side of your screen is some older data from my group, the Dermatology Clinical Effectiveness Research Network called Discern that we published. Looking at real world data, patients are showing up for follow-up in clinical practices across the United States. And the histogram is the likelihood the patient was clear or almost clear at that visit. And then the horizontal bars is what you would expect from the clinical trial. So in all cases for the therapies we use, you would expect much better clearance rates than what you actually see in real world data, real world clinical practice. And then I just want to drive home this concept of efficacy versus effectiveness. So, efficacy is really for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials. We're really trying to ask, under ideal conditions, could this drug work and be effective and safe in a highly selected population? You're trying to maximize internal validity. Effectiveness really asks the question, well, how well does this therapy work on real world settings, in usual care, where there's different types of patients taking it, a different expertise from providers, things of that nature. So the goal is to maximize generalizability or external validity. An example of a pragmatic trial going on was increasingly, you're going to see this in the literature now, of sort of pragmatic trials being done in the field of psoriasis. We're doing a randomized trial of home versus office phototherapy in roughly 1,050 patients at 40 sites across the country, where virtually all the data we're collecting is either in routine medical care, what the doctors would collect anyway, or in an app the patient puts in their phone where they report some patient-reported outcomes. And the inclusion criteria reflect clinical practice. There was like 2 or 3 inclusion-exclusion criteria. And I've had patients in this trial, one woman who's pregnant and on a biologic and not doing well. So that's the kind of person who would never be represented in an efficacy trial, but in an effectiveness trial, we want to represent all patients.